in a month from now, we will be celebrating Australia Day, or at least the vast majority of our population of 25 million people will be celebrating. But once again, there will be a minority who will again use this occasion to tell us they don't like Australia Day very much. And if it comes to that, they don't really like Australia very much. In fact, they probably don't like you very much because you're Australian. Some of this odd minority get themselves elected to local councils and try to block Australia Day from happening in their areas. Already the Albanese government has given in and said there will be no penalties for those local councils that refuse to hold citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. And one major television network, the 10 network, has declared earnestly that Australia Day is, quote, not a day of celebration. And the 10 network is not alone. I mean, even before Christmas, in the days leading up to Christmas, we had some of Australia's biggest companies offering their staff the opportunity to skip Australia Day, undermining the traditional support for the public holiday. The pile-on has started already, and you can imagine how much negativity there will be by the time we actually get to January 26th. Actually reminds me of a phrase coined by Spiro Agnew, nattering nabobs of negativity. But the negative naysayers are powerless to touch the hearts of ordinary Australians who love this country and are happy to celebrate it. The whinging, moaning minority look at Australia Day and complain there's nothing to celebrate. So let's us prepare ourselves now, well ahead of time, for the annual whinge-fest by reminding ourselves of how much there is to celebrate and why the whingers are so wrong. The nothing to celebrate in Australia crowd are quite likely to call January 26th Invasion Day. They'll moan the land was stolen from Aboriginal people by colonial oppressors. Look, I have to be reminded to live in the present, not in the past. This coming Australia Day will be celebrated in 2023, not 1823. There is no one alive who has had any land stolen from them by colonial oppressors. And there are no colonial oppressors alive who did any stealing. They are all dead. They died long ago. As Warren Mundine once said, living in the past is unproductive and unhealthy. And he's right. Living in the past can eat up your life in the present with bitterness and resentment. And the present is worth celebrating. Present-day Australia has some 30,000 Indigenous people with university degrees. They're doing just as well as any other middle-class Australians. Present-day Australia has thousands of Indigenous business people running thriving, successful businesses. And when I mentioned this to Warren Mundine, he said, currently, Kel, he said there are 16,000 Indigenous Australians enrolled in universities. Now, there's another side to the story. I mean, at the same time, for those Indigenous Australians who are living in remote communities marked by failure and alcohol-fuelled violence, every political party is committed to closing the gap, helping those in need, every political party. Meanwhile, modern Australia includes our Indigenous heritage, but it's built on more than that, because modern Australia is a migrant nation. Almost 50% of Australians are either born overseas or have parents who were born overseas. In 25% of Australian homes, a language in addition to English is spoken. Australia was built on three foundations: our Indigenous heritage, our British culture and our migrant character, and all three are worth celebrating. Now, like every country on earth, our history tells a mixed story. There are dark and disturbing pages, and we must not deny those. But we must tell the truth, the whole truth, and see the courageous and the good stories in our history as well. You know, from Australia's diggers on the goldfields who enriched the nation, to heroic Anzacs on the battlefields, to our medical pioneers who did great work, from flourishing businesses and a growing economy, to the help your neighbour spirit in Australian communities, which we see at its best when floods or bushfires strike. There is so much to celebrate. When British culture arrived, it brought with it technology and engineering and the rule of law and Christian civilization and the seeds of our democracy. And it brought a written language. Before 1788, it's estimated there were at least 250 different languages spoken across Australia. None of them were written languages, and all of them were incomprehensible to each other. Today, we are united by the English language. British settlement brought us the language of Shakespeare and the King James Bible. And the Australian dialect of English, Aussie English, is one of the best and brightest and most creative languages on earth. As I said in one of my books, Aussie English is as bright as a box of budgies and as strong as a mallee bull. Plus, we have welcomed more migrants from more different countries than any other place on earth. The result is a rich, blended culture that brings all this together. Australia's greatest poet, the fabulous Les Murray, in his book The Boys Who Stole the Funeral, explains this with an image of what he calls the common pot. It's the community, the common pot, to which everyone makes a contribution. So the mixture just gets richer and better and is shared by all. Now, maybe you've never thought of Australia in quite that way as the common pot, but it is. It is a migrant nation. From the stunning landscapes around us to the rich diversity of people who live here, Australia has much to celebrate. Which brings us to the story of Dorothea McKellar. Inspired by her experience on her brother's farms near Gunnedah in New South Wales, Dorothea McKellar wrote a poem that captures what we will celebrate on Australia Day. She's only 19 years old when she wrote the poem called My Country. She was in England at the time and homesick for the panoramic landscapes of this stunning land. And her poem was published in a British magazine, The Spectator, and rapidly became a much memorised, much recited sort of love letter to our country. And I hope it is still being taught to school kids today. And I reckon this poem, My Country, would be worth getting out to share with your children and your grandchildren on Australia Day. You could even read the words over the barbecue when you have friends or family around. And look, I promise you there won't be a dry eye in the house when you're finished. I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of ragged mountain ranges, of droughts and flooding rains. I love her far horizons. I love her jewel sea, her beauty and her terror, the wide brown land for me. And now I'm getting a little bit misty because it does that to you. Until yesterday morning, I was at a beach resort with my family and I was standing under gum trees and all I could hear was cicadas. That's the sound of summer in Australia, the humming of cicadas. And then in came laughing kookaburras over the top of it. And I thought, who would ever want to live anywhere else? You know, this is the magnificent land that people have been enjoying for tens of thousands of years, and every wave of migrants that arrives delights in. And those words from Dorothea McKellar, they make the narcs who don't want us to enjoy our country or enjoy Australia Day look like grumps, don't they? Yes, we've got a lot to celebrate on Australia Day, so start thinking about it now, about a month ahead. Plan to ignore the narcs. Plan how you'll celebrate it. Plan to celebrate it so well the whingers and the narcs will look like drongos.